You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, and thanks for coming back to listen to the show. This is Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, and I'm Mighty Blue, otherwise known by my family as Steve Adams. It's Thanksgiving this week. In fact, if you're listening on the day of release, why are you? You should be watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, eating obscene amounts of food, and watching the Detroit Lions losing their fourth straight Thanksgiving Day game. Mind you, this one's against the Texans, so they may have a shot at breaking that terrible run. Our first guest today is Matthew Emerson. Matthew hiked the trail in 2011, and when you hear his story, you'll maybe understand why I was a little concerned about having him on the show. Nothing about Matthew, by the way. I was just concerned how much he may get into his very difficult life from the age of 18. He's written a book about his hike, but when I read the opening chapters, it was all about those early years, and it is visceral. But you'll hear an articulate guy with some finely honed thoughts on the trail that I'm sure have become more nuanced over the years. Matthew will be on shortly. Now, normally we'd have a couple of midsections of the show. We have, but this is neither the ATC, we didn't record because of the holidays, and the final chat, which has already been postponed twice, with Bill Tickner, Mr. President. Well, Bill has been postponed again. I tried the interview, but the sound was so bad that I've shelved it for a week once more to make sure that you can all hear. He's got some really interesting things to say. So, instead of those two, I've continued the book theme by inviting on Ben Crawford. You may remember Ben as the guy who, along with his wife Cammie, took their 6 kids along with them on their Appalachian Trail hike in 2018. They got a lot of coverage at the time, some good, some bad, and Ben has written quite graphically about their journey, good and bad. Ben will be on after Matthew. Then, keeping the book theme alive for the holidays, Larry Luxembourg's Walking the Appalachian Trail introduces a giant map. So let's get on. Here's Matthew Emerson, or, as he explains, Prodigy. So let's meet today's guest. This is Matthew Emerson. Hi, Matthew. How are you?
Well, how are you? It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you along. And one thing I forgot to ask you, what was your trail name?
My trail name was Prodigy. But then I spelt it my own way, which is Prada with a capital G at the end.
Oh, dear me. So, yeah. but no, so why were you Prodigy?
So I got I'll give you the little backstory how I got the name, because, I was just Matt, nothing special, got an ordinary name. Sure. And then I got the name at this hostel, Standing Bear, where I want to say it was right either
just off the Smokies. Yeah, just off the Smokies, yeah.
Yeah, at the tail end of it there. And me and a couple of the folks I was hiking with, we dipped in there to get some, ice cream and, the trail novelties of just crap and whatnot.
Sure.
So anyway, I went in there to get an Oreo ice cream sandwich. I went to pay for it, and the guy's like, what's your trail name? And I was like, oh, it's just Matt. He's like, well, I'm not selling you anything without a trail name. So he him and another fellow, looked me over, kind of felt like a piece of meat for a second, but they kind of looked me over and they're like, oh, tell us about yourself. And I was like, well, kind of just came out here on a whim, and occasionally I'll do a big mile day and stuff like that. And they just looked at me, and they're like, Prodigy.
Nice.
And that is how it really began. So.
Nice to be named Prodigy. Now,
I had to live up to it. That was it.
Well, there is that, of course, yeah. Now, you hiked the ATE back in 2011, and as I understand it, it was your Uncle Willie who put the Appalachian Trail on your radar. How did that happen? How did that come about?
So it really all started, the first real mention of the trail in my orbit was we were at a family reunion / funeral for my grandma. So we were up in upstate New York. Uh-huh. And so, my dad and a couple of his brothers came, and a few of my aunts came. And so my Uncle Willie, he thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail in 1994. His trail name was Marathon Man.
Okay.
And that kind of catalyzed his career into ultra marathon running and
all right, nice.
Kind of all these what I would say obscure events, kind of crazy events. But yeah, he's just a guy who likes to be outside, as he would describe it. So he kind of first presented the idea of hiking kind of the whole thing. I mean, my dad had done a lot of it, but never finished the whole thing. So there was kind of little nuggets there of, they probably want one of us to do it. They didn't overly say it because we weren't really hiking people. Even though we grew up in, the White Mountains, that wasn't really a staple of our upbringing or anything like that. Okay. So they first really mentioned it, and then, through a series of events, I got the opportunity to do it.
And I know you've written about your hike, and I'm going to talk about your book later. But I read the first couple of chapters of your book. As I say, we're going to talk about it later. But the opening of it is really damn grim. You had a pretty tough time in your late teens, didn't you? Now, share some of that, not all of it. I don't want you to ruin it if people read your book, but man, you had a pretty tough time, didn't you?
Well, I'll narrow it down to a couple of words, which is it was a real squalor in every facet of life for the most part. But you try and find humor in it, and I try to at least express that through the pages. I mean, it's a typical course that people really go through, after high school. If you don't immediately go into a trade or to college or something like that, naturally you have to start working unless you have a foundation to build off of. You're going to start at the bottom, which is where I was.
All right. So you left home at what age?
After I graduated high school, so I was 18.
All right. And was that because you wanted to or because you had to?
Well, that was I'd say that's kind of the American way. Like that's, you
not anymore. It's not
18, independent, and that's that. You got to live and make your own choices and whatnot.
Now that is, you said you lived in squalor, and you're definitely underplaying it for this. That isn't a cycle that's easy to break, is it? Because once you get into it, you're in it. What did you do to get yourself out of it?
Well, looking back on it now, I think if I never hiked the trail, I might have never gotten out of it. I think that the fact that I did something that was, one, difficult, but it took a long time to do it, so there was an element of consistency to it, and a daily struggle, which, at the time, how I was living, there was a daily struggle, but there's means of kind of putting that in the back of your mind and only thinking of the present, not thinking of long-term future or any way of getting out of it, and especially if you're in an environment with your peers in the same boat, it's very easy to just stay dormant.
Yeah, it is, but you made the decision to go. I mean, making that step forward. I think so many people would love to hike the Appalachian Trail and they don't get around to doing it. You made that decision to go, but it isn't as simple as that, is it? So, because how do you prepare for it, and also how were you able to finance it? Because it's not the cheapest thing in the world to do, is it?
Well, I'd say I ran into quite the series of events where my grandma had died, and then we inherited like a tiny amount of money. Of course, my dad was smart enough to realize that kids are young and dumb with money, so let me think of how it should be allocated and spent. And as I write in the book, through a little series of events, I was in the position where I was unemployed, and he presented the idea of hiking it, and kind of my dad's trail intellect knowledge made it a smoother transition than it would have been if it was all on me to plan it and whatnot. I certainly wouldn't have done it if it took my own effort and diligence to learn whether it's cooking, what to buy, tent, this, that, all those things, that people spend so much time on. Yeah.
So you took their knowledge or help with their knowledge. Did you read much about it, or did you know? I suppose the question really is, did you know what to expect at the top of spring when you started?
No, not at all. I mean,
nothing prepares you for it. Does it?
I just kind of I think I probably benefited by not learning too much about it, because then I probably would have talked myself out of it. I think that the fact that I think I would have done anything to get out of the situation I was in. In hindsight, thinking about it now. So
anything was better.
Oh, fresh air. That was
dear me, that was fun. That reminds me of a story that I read in the book. Yeah. Oh my God. So you stood on the top of Springer. Good for you, by the way, for making that. You have to take that step, don't you, at some stage? And what you just said really struck a chord with me, because I wrote a free book, which I give away, called Hiking the Appalachian Trail is Easy.
I wish
especially
it were, yeah.
no, but especially if you've never hiked before, because you don't know what to expect. You know, it all comes as a shock to me. So everything I did, if it didn't work out, I would do something different, and you learn that way, don't you?
Well, how long did you prepare before you hopped on the whiteboard?
Really, no, I'd read forever. I'd read loads and loads of stuff, but standing on top of that mountain, suddenly thinking, "Oh my gosh, what am I doing now?" You know, where am I?
Yeah, why? Yeah, I just remember, my dad driving away at Big Stamp Gap. I was like, "All right, like this is it."
All right, you're away.
Shit, that's what I was thinking. I only had one pole because the other one broke before I even started.
Oh my gosh!
So I was like, damn it, bad
So,
omen.
so you headed out in early April, I think it was,
April
2011.
22nd.
Yeah. Oh, so quite late in April. So there were quite a few
That's
people.
why I was running down the hills.
Right. Oh, right. So you really were quite like. Why did you leave it so late to start, or did you think that was a reasonable time anyway?
I mean, honestly, as I write about in the book, I was literally working up until, I want to say, right about April 18th, because it was only about 2-3 days, and then boom, flew out and started.
You were there. God, yeah.
That was it. There was a small amount of respite before I was thrust into the wilderness.
And what were those early miles like? Was it a shock to your system, or did you?
Oh, it killed.
Were you okay with
ass.
it?
Jesus,
Really?
I can remember the very first day. Yeah, that very first April 22nd day. It started out, misty and little drizzle, and you start going, you start sweating, you start taking layers off, and then I stopped at that very first shelter, and there was a guy there who was just covered in poison ivy and this and that. And I was just looking, I was like, oh my God, like, what the hell could happen to me? He looks like he knows what he's doing. So certainly that. But the initial thing was, I'd never been really out of New England for that matter, relatively below the Mason-Dixon line or anything like that. So it was all really, it was like I was in America, but it was just completely different atmosphere, environment.
And a different America for an African American guy as well, I'd imagine.
Oh, at the time. Things were. I went down there with an open mind. I'd certainly say that.
And how did people approach you on the trail? Were they, because there were very few, I'd imagine, if any, African Americans on the trail that year. So
I believe I can remember.
You pretty much stood out. I think
I saw 2 other ones.
Right.
Well, and only one I knew finished.
Right.
That was it.
And did you have any issues with that, or did you just? You don't. You said one thing. You said to me, you grew up in a. Unless I got this entirely wrong, and my notes are pretty garbled sometimes. You said you grew up in a white household, and so
I'd say I grew up in New Hampshire, which is 98% white, and then I grew up in North Conway, which is if you get down in the White Mountains, right about Crawford Notch, about 15 miles from there is North Conway, and that's where I grew up, which is pretty much a tourist area. So a lot of it, there wasn't really a lot of. I'll put it this way: there was my family, and then one Chinese family who owned a Chinese restaurant, and that was all the color that was to go around.
And you did tell me that you made a bunch of mistakes pretty much straight away, didn't you?
Oh God! I mean, I didn't even know how to use the damn bear cables. It was more so like.
But it's not a natural thing to know, is it? Why would you know unless you try it out?
Yeah, that was the thing. But it seemed like everybody else knew how to do it.
Oh, right.
It came so natural. Like everybody else had this smooth boom camp set up. But
didn't you find Didn't you find though that a lot of people were just as nervous as? I mean, I was pretty nervous on day one. I think a lot of people were fronting it up a bit. They were trying to look like they knew what they're doing, but we were all just as frightened as each other. First couple of days.
I think one of the first things, my first night that stood out to me, I remember it was pretty much a full shelter, that Hawk Mountain shelter. I don't remember how many people it fits in, maybe like 8 or 10, something like that.
Officially, you can get about 20. Yeah, you can get about 20.
They'll pack them in there like sardines. But,
yeah.
I remember it was a real downpour, whatnot, and this kid comes up towards the shelter, and you ever meet these people? They try so hard not to swear, like they'll literally do these mental gymnastics, to do that. So that kind of took me back, and then he just really whipped out a gun, like that, just like that. He's like, I heard there's bears around here, and whatnot. And so I grew up in New Hampshire. I knew people who had guns. I didn't grow up with them, so it didn't. It took me aback how brazen, it was. But nobody else was startled, so I'm like, oh well, it is what it is. But he slept outside in a tarp tent, even in a downpour, so.
Good
Had to give him respect where it's due.
Yeah, I don't think I'd like to turn up in the middle of the night next to a guy who's got a gun.
Yeah,
you just would never know, would you?
So did you like every stereotype's coming out, just like that.
So did you make friends earlier? Did you start hiking with other people?
Yeah, I had kind of common New England roots with some of the first people I met on the trail, and I ended up hiking with them for a little bit. There was these 3 kids from Connecticut who I met, who they were all 20 and I was 21, so we were kind of in the same little cohort there. And then there was this pair who, oh God, their names elude me, but they hiked with a cooler. They had like steak and wine. And
oh my gosh.
They hiked from Big Stamp Gap to, they got off before Neil's Gap, like Gooch Gap, something like that. I don't want to sound, it was after that shelter, there was like a road crossing. Yeah, I remember they got off there, but that was my first night. I remember on the trail, they had like wine and eggs, and
it might have been just to refill the cooler.
I remember they were just dragging it. They didn't. It was these 2 middle-aged dudes, and I just that was really my first night. I was like, well, shit, if I knew it was always going to be like this, then a lot sooner.
Yeah. And how did you cope with logistics? Did you send boxes, or did you get stuff from?
I would generally just go into town. That was really the primary thing. I mean, when I started, I wish I would have started with the AWOL guide, because I think everybody ended up getting, at least when I did the trail, most people ended up using his guide. That seemed to be the most effective. Yeah. But when I started, all I had was like maps and shit. So I think, as we mentioned before, like I got lost a couple times, where to the point where, you're tired, you don't know which way is north. Like, you're like, all right, have I been here before? So many things look the same, this and that.
Your dad did tell you to follow the white blazes, didn't he?
Oh, yeah. It was funny because, like, some of the people I remember meeting out there, you had, some of the folks who were like purists and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Then, so there was like a group of people like that. And then there was another group that they're like, oh, like, hike your own hike. You should have fun. You should, have this like adventure or whatnot. So I tried to kind of do a little bit of both.
What have you taken away from that part of it? The idea of how you should approach a hike. If somebody ever asks you now if they're going on a trip, what do you say to them they should do? Or do you just say, just do what you want to do? Or do you feel that you have advice to give somebody, or do you think that everybody should just discover their own way of doing this?
I mean, the best advice I could ever give someone to do it would be to wake up early and hike. That would be the first thing. Yes. So definitely try and do that, because then you can really
go. That's a surprisingly important thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And luckily I'm a morning person, so that wasn't really, a problem. But definitely that, because I mean, the times where I was like, scared on the trail. Yeah, it was at night. It was alone. It was raining. It was, short on food.
You did a couple of really long days, didn't you, on the trail?
Yeah, I remember the biggest day I did was from 501 shelter into almost Palmerton, so just before that.
And how many miles was that?
It was over 40 miles.
That's ridiculous.
I woke up at like 3 a.m. Yeah, right. And it was one of those, where when you're all around the campfire and whatnot, people, you start bullshit and whatnot. Oh, I'm gonna go here. Oh, I'm gonna go here.
Yeah, that's how guys didn't do that.
Oh yeah, and I remember I was like, you guys are never gonna see me again. I'm gonna do all these miles. I'll be gone.
Was it you trying to be Prodigy?
I would say I tried to live up to the name. Yeah.
Yeah, but you're a young man anyway. So how did the physical side hit you in the first place, or were you already quite fit?
I mean, I'd say I was just skinny. I mean, I looked fit. I was in decent shape, whatnot. But it's a whole different type of shape. Yeah, that's one thing totally. I definitely learned. I was a little overconfident and thinking I was like, oh, well, I'm a young dude. I can just run, bounce up and down the blazes, whatnot.
It's not quite as easy as that, is it?
Oh, I remember seeing elderly men just flying, just passing me easily on the uphills and whatnot. But I definitely remember the second day, because I felt everything I did from the first day. I mean, Jesus, the pack digging into the shoulder blades, and
how did that advice work out? Because I presume your father and your uncle talked to you about the gear you got. Were you quite happy with the gear you took, or did that take some getting used to as well?
Well, to be honest, I had nothing to compare it to. Like, I remember when I went to go.
Yeah, but you know when something's comfortable. You know when you're comfortable.
Oh,
in
yeah,
tent.
yeah. Oh, I mean,
if you're warm enough in your sleeping bag and things like that.
Like the backpack, I used an Osprey Atmos 65, and that was. I saw a couple other people using that pack.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, it was extremely comfortable and more than big enough. I mean, I still have the pack to this
cool.
day.
That's cool.
Which is good. And then really, I wish the only other thing I would have done was I saw a lot of people had like the trail running shoes, and my shoes are a little heavier. They're like these mid-cut garment.
I'd make up.
So that
boots as well.
That would be the other thing that I was just curious to see how different it might have been. I noticed that people who had those went through more shoes. In my whole hike, I had my first pair lasted from Springer Mountain to right over Connecticut.
Oh wow!
I want to say like Kent, Connecticut, right around there.
So well over 1,000 miles then.
Cool. Oh yeah, but they were beat to shit. They had like holes in them. I remember. There was like a dog had bitten a chunk out of them. Anytime it was raining, like I want to say that was probably the direct contributor to my athlete's foot that I still have to
Oh, really?
today. Yeah.
Oh, crikey.
That's my reminder of the trail.
Did you? I'm sure there are many other reminders. It must be more than just the
That's the
athlete's
physical
foot.
that
Right.
never goes away.
And another one of my notes, which I didn't take any notes about, was you mentioned a snake den. That's never going to be good.
Oh, Christ.
One snake's bad enough. So tell me about a snake den.
Bloody hell. So yeah, that was on the biggest day I did. I came across these legless bastards right about I want to say it was right about like really noontime, and it was like there was in Pennsylvania, it's real rocky up in there, and
sure.
There was kind of like open sky, so the sun was just beating directly onto the trail at a higher elevation. And I remember first seeing one kind of like slowly slither across the
always
trail.
Make you jump, don't they?
Yeah. Oh my God. Plus, I'm afraid of snakes anyway. So you're alone and this and this.
Yeah.
And the first time I heard the rattle, it sounded like a Gillette, like electric razor, to me. So when I first heard one, it took me back, and then it was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like over and over.
Oh wow!
And then I just started running. That was the natural thing to do. And when I started seeing them, oh my God, like it was like a nightmare, to be honest.
And did you have to go, were they on the trail or did you go around them, or where were they?
So it was such a rocky area that, I tried to go around them. I tried to just not think of, so many things happen at one time, when you're startled by like a bear or a deer or anything like that. It all happens so quickly that you just think like, all right, how do I diffuse the situation?
Yeah.
And especially with those, because I was like, all right, if I get bit here, like I'm in trouble, like real trouble.
Yes.
Like I'm probably a dead man right here.
I never saw more than one snake with any other snake, so I couldn't imagine what that would have been like. I wouldn't have liked that at all.
Nah, that was not fun.
And
that'll be pushed to a bigger day, so.
Yeah, and you did something that I didn't do when I was on the trail, which I kind of wish I did. Both times I've done it now, and I didn't do this. You went into DC on the train from Harper's Ferry. I bet that was fun. Did you enjoy that?
It was good times. I went in there right around 4th of July, so I went there July 3rd, and then I was only planning on going there on one day, so I ended up missing the train back. That's
excellent effort.
Stupidity, yeah, right there. And then so in the end, I had there was a hostel there in Harper's Ferry that I left my backpack at, and other shit. Because I was only planning to be there for a day, and so I was there. My sandals walking around. Of course, it rains, and so when I missed the train, I realized I was like, all right, my cell phone's dead. I don't have enough money to stay in a hotel, especially around here. Micro trash. Like Jesus.
Yeah.
So I remember I ended up just passing out in a handicapped porta potty.
Nice, I bet that was lovely.
It was, you realize how bad you smell when you don't smell the things around you. Like that was a good indicator. I was like, I smell like shit.
Dear
real dookie.
You know what? That's kind of, I guess that's one of the things you take with you on the trail, don't you? All these strange little stories. Funny enough, we were just away a couple of weekends ago to a retreat, a hiker's retreat, and we were talking about the trail stories, and it struck me that everybody there who was telling the stories, that things they'd done, the other people who were listening were going to have their own stories soon because they were going to hike. You can't not do this thing. You can't do this 4, 5, 6 month hike and not have stories from it, can you? So sleeping in a porta potty I could do without. By the way, just so you know.
Well, I definitely remember. That was probably the. Well, do you remember that the Taj Mahal? That there was like a shelter, and then like that privy was like huge. And that's what they called it there. It was right after.
Well, there's a 2-seat privy. Is that what you mean?
No, I don't remember being 2 seat. Yeah, that sounds like a prison.
Yeah,
but no, this huge ass stall. I was like, oh man, too bad this wasn't there in the middle of the National Mall to sleep in. But I mean, I don't know. Did you ever cowboy camp during your experience?
Never? Once. No.
Oh, you're missing out.
Do you know what? Maybe I was, but I'm glad I slept in the tent. I would want anything crawling into my sleeping bag at night. I would not have enjoyed that at all. I'm quite sure. Things change when you get older. You do not want certain things in your life, and that would be one of them. And when you got to New York, you went to stay with your mother for, I think you said 5 days.
Oh, New Hampshire, yeah.
Oh, it was in New Hampshire, sorry, yeah. You said you went to stay there for 5 days with some friends.
Oh, yeah.
I would have found that a long time off the trail when you're so near the end then. Was it tough getting back on?
Well, it was kind of twofold, where during that time, Hurricane Sandy, I think it was, came through and really decimated the trail in the White Mountains. And during that time, so the trail was closed for about a week.
Right.
And one of the guys I hiked with in our little hiking group, he paid for us to stay at this Marriott in Lebanon.
Nice.
For 5 days.
Wow.
While the trail was closed down. So, I think it's in the hikers just innate nature to help one another. You have the same common goal.
Sure.
And whatnot. And so, he did that. And then we had been hiking together for a period of time. There's 5 of us. And so once we got to Crawford Notch, I was like, well, wait, my mom's house is only 15, not far from here. So she took us in and put them to work, of course. They did painting, stacking wood.
Excellent.
All kinds of shit, and just kind of recuperated to kind of get ready for the end there.
But you were ready to get back on?
I was ready to get it over with.
I'm sure. But, and I thought about this after we spoke. I always try to think of how I would be in your circumstance. I know it's difficult when you haven't lived those circumstances, but you're still moving north, and with the tough life that you had in the past behind you, you must have had a few thoughts about coming back to so-called real life. What did you think you were going to do when you finished? Had you made any plans on the journey, or had you made plans before you left, or did you know what you were coming back to?
Well, naturally, you hike by yourself. You have an abundance of alone time.
Yeah, so way too much sometimes.
You drive yourself crazy.
Oh, totally.
But, I looked at the trail in kind of in this sense, which there is a historian, Arnold Toynbee, and he talked about this phenomenon of withdrawal and return, which is people who are in a given situation that they fail in, they need to then, get out of that situation and go through a new experience to then go back to what they were in before with new skills, abilities, and kind of a new outlook of it. So when I was doing the trail, I was hiking, so I was building, the mental strength that I would then, use to succeed in real world, as you'd call it. But at the same time, I was also, reading quite a bit. I mean, luckily there was books at almost every shelter.
Yes.
Not just the good book, not the Bible. There was other stuff like that. So I benefited from that and being around just such a diverse group of people, and everybody had their own opinion, their own kind of experiences that I could then learn from, and they can learn from me, and together we're then learning about life. So, that repeated itself so many times that eventually, you grow as a person and almost forget how you used to be.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. I think some people need to be aware that when they go on this trail, be careful what you wish for. You may end up you may not even end up as you wish you're going to be, but you're going to end up different when you go on this trip. And it obviously seems to have had an impact on you.
Oh, yeah. One of the best things about the trail, and I'm sure you can attest to this, is that you meet people in such an organic way that you can't immediately judge them by the traditional means of society, which is, if I saw you, it's like, oh, Steve, what do you do? And that is who you are.
Sure.
Where when everybody is doing the same thing, I mean, most people are all trying to get to Maine. So you have that common bond. So then you kind of learn about somebody else from that innate rapport, where you can't judge them in those traditional ways. You can't judge them how they look or how they dress, because everybody essentially looks the same, smells the same.
Sure. So
there's an equilibrium there, which was good. So a lot of people, I thought if I didn't meet them on the trail, I would have never.
Absolutely.
Our paths would have never crossed.
And I've been struck by that more and more. Obviously, doing the podcast even more so, because I meet lots of people through hiking now, which I never would have done, and I feel I've been blessed for that. So you had these thoughts about what you were going to do when you came back, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. But do you recall that last day, Katahdin? What was it like for you going up Katahdin?
Oh man, that October 5th. I remember it was like it just happened. I mean, it was. That was a hard climb. It was very difficult. I could certainly say that. And initially there was kind of the uncertainty of, are we going to be able to hike today or not? Are they going to shut down the park? Whatnot?
Oh, really? Wow.
But, once that was out of the way and, started and really got above tree line, it was so windy and snowing and just like, my fingers were just turning yellow, but I just wanted to be done. At the same time, I just want to be done. Like it's.
Was there any part of you that was enjoying it so much you didn't want it to be done? I wanted it to be done for the last 500 miles when I went the first time. Not so much the second time, but certainly the first time. Don't you think there's a hint of regret also when you finish?
That was probably one of the more dominant topics that everyone was kind of running through. Towards the very end there, I mean, but I'd always say, "Oh, would you do it again?" Or are you ready to?
I said I never.
Be through hiking. Yeah.
I said I never would do ever hike again as long as I lived. And 5 years later, I did it. I did the whole thing again. So
shit.
Yeah. So
no, yeah. For me, I mean, it took me a while to enjoy it, and then there was a period of where I really enjoyed it. Each day, and then. I got to a point where I'm like, all right, I need a new challenge.
Sure.
That was that. But I really missed just the characters. Some of the people, you meet. I'm sure you can think of it yourself. There's certain people just like, they're very hard to forget how they are.
I think you normally see the best a person can be when they're on the trail. I rarely have seen people better off the trail than on the trail. I think it brings out something in you which is probably better than your normal self in many ways, because you haven't got as many of the distractions of normal life. And I love that, meeting people in that situation. And anyway,
but you an organic way of
absolutely, And you finished and you went back to college.
I eventually did, yes.
Right. So where did you go when you got back home? Did you go back home to your mother's or what?
Yeah, my mom had just had knee surgery a couple months
cool.
after. So, I came back, helped her out.
Right.
And eventually I made my way to Pittsburgh, and I went to Chatham University there, and then came back to New Hampshire and started working in politics here.
Working in politics in New Hampshire. Oh, interesting. Mm-hmm. And so why did you decide to write a book about the experience? Because you didn't do that straight away, did you? This is only quite recent.
No, I didn't. I started it maybe my sophomore year in undergrad. Just as kind of like, I've been telling the same story so many times. Where I'm like, all right, let me see if I at least write it down. Maybe.
Yeah, but then of course I have to tell everybody on here, they lose their audience, don't they? People don't want to hear it anymore, do they? So, it's terrible, isn't it?
Mm. Yeah. I think. Because you wrote a book. Once you start writing and you have the story kind of visualized in your head,
sure,
and you see how it all comes together, it starts writing itself. And then, for me, it was very difficult to sit there on the my laptop, Microsoft Word, and doing it. So what I eventually did was I used the software Dragon and just dictated it.
Oh, did you?
And then went back and edited the dictation.
That was interesting. So did you find that quite easy to do?
Yeah, much more so. At least for me, because I realized that I wasn't the best writer. I could tell a story. Those are two different things, I later realized.
Yes.
And it was just much smoother for me to do that. I didn't sit there thinking of like, oh my God, have I used the same word so many times or this, that.
There's software for that though. You can work that out.
Oh, luckily there's software for anything. I'm just not good at it.
You could run it through so much software, and it'll take so many things. It'll tell you every time you don't use the word so many times. I remember I used the word particular 5 times on one page. I never even noticed. So there you go. So that was taken out by the software. So you're done with hiking now, or do you think you might do it again?
I mean, a part of me wants to hike Katahdin again, or maybe like certain parts in the trail. Like, yeah, I'd love to go to Max Patch again. I'd love to go. I mean, I didn't go to Trail Days, so I always I'm curious to see how that is. I've kind of gotten mixed.
People get drunk a lot.
Yeah, I would say I've heard mixed things from it. People get drunk a lot. I want to say I remember there being a 24-hour challenge right around Damascus where it was like 24 beers and 24 hours over 24 miles, something like that.
No, see, absolutely no. That's definitely not the thing to do.
I'm a lightweight. I can't handle that shit.
You don't really do any of that. Well, look, But before we go, what is the name of the book, and where can people find it?
The book is called Cutting Loose: Coming of Age on the Appalachian Trail, and you can find it on Amazon. Cool.
Well, you sound like you did cut loose, and you did come of age on the Appalachian Trail as well.
I ran down those trails, man, like it or not.
Well, I appreciate you coming and talking to us about it, and I wish you well in the future.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Steve, and you take it easy, man.
Yeah, and you. Cheers. Bye.
Take care.
I thought he made some astute observations and has certainly matured his thoughts in the 9 years since he hit the trail. I haven't read his full book, but the writing is intimate and very descriptive of his time in poverty. If he brings the same detail to his hiking story, it should be a really good read. Some of you may have seen the short video I put on the Hiking Radio Network Facebook page this week. Do you remember a few weeks ago when I told you that a listener, Don Robinson, had kindly gifted me a giant ATC map by Red F Mapping, and that Larry Knight, who prepares the maps, had offered to personalise it for me? Well, the completed map arrived a couple of days ago, and I did a video showing the incredible amount of detail that Larry puts on the maps. I've put a link to the video in the show notes. Trust me, you will be blown away when you see it. Larry is actually a former thru hiker himself, so I'll be having him on as a guest soon to talk about his thru hike and also about these truly amazing maps. As I say, no ATC and no Build Tickner today, so let's hear from a friend of the show and previous guest, Ben Crawford. Here's Ben. Well, we're back on now with a friend of the show, Ben Crawford. Hi, Ben. How are you?
Hey, Steve. Good to see you or talk to you again.
Yeah, but you are actually seeing. The listeners can't see this, but we are actually seeing each other. Ben did the crazy thing a few years ago with his wife Cammie, and they took their 6 children on the AT. And now you've written a book about it because you've already told us the story on the show. So why did you decide to write a book, or did that seem an obvious progression, or was that always your plan?
No, it was not the plan. And I mean, I think a lot of people might know we made more than 100 videos while on trail. So my thought always was, what more can people want? Like, video is where it's at. It's like You get to see it and hear about it. So there's really nothing to add. And we had so many people while we were hiking ask us if we were writing a book that it started to just make us wonder. And then I think when we were done, we felt like there was so much we didn't cover in the video, mostly because the videos were being made in real time.
Cool,
and we were going through hell in the snow and dealing with public opinion and just the trail itself, that when we finished, we felt like there was so much more perspective that we had that was never covered in the videos. So
when I'm actually writing a book of my last 2019 hike as well, and I'm using because I podcasted on the trail, much the same you videoed on the trail. I'm using my podcast to jars your memory again. Is that how you did it, or did you actually keep a journal as well as doing all that videoing?
It was a pretty tedious process because accuracy was so important to me. We had our journal. We had 120 trail videos that we almost rewatched end to end, which actually can be pretty traumatic. Like, not all those moments are happy moments. And we also had 6 of the kids' journals, which was a really wild experience for me because these are journals that they gave me permission to go through that I never had time to go through while on the trail.
Wow.
So I'm getting their perspective of the trail, a year or two after the fact. So it gives me a whole new way of seeing the experience even.
I'm sure. So that research, that's interesting. Has it changed your view of what you thought at the time? Or did it reaffirm your view of what you thought was happening?
Oh, all the above. I mean, it's not black or white. And I do not tell people that, oh, this was a slam dunk, no regrets, And there's been moments where we're like, what the hell did we do when you stack up the cost and you,
Sure.
And we've had to have moments where going through the kids' journals has made me go to kids and apologize and offer, just ways to make things right. But also seeing, 2 years after our journey now, you don't remember the hard times as much. No one does, but we remember the good times.
Yeah.
And there's a rich perspective we have that we were not able to get while in the middle of it. So,
and have you done much, as you've written this 2 years after, you went in 2018? Yes, 2018.
Yeah, we were 2018.
Yeah. So you're 2 years after this. Have you written this with a fresh perspective? Or are you telling it from when you did it? Or have you included these last 2 years as well?
Well, it's kind of weird because I started the book like the month after getting off the trail.
Oh, right.
I mean, so it's actually taken 2 years to write. So
you slacker.
Well, I actually thought it would be 5 or 6 months. So from one perspective, it's a year and a half behind. But I don't think that was super realistic.
No.
So it does have a lot of fresh stuff because it was starting to be written then, and I started recording transcripts right after the trail. But I've also, we did about 15 drafts. So the later drafts kept on including more and more of these like one sentences and one paragraph, like that I think have more depth and perspective that are more from who I am now.
Interesting. And I would actually, I'd be fascinated. For example, Dove was a young lady then. She was 17. Now she's now, I guess, 19 now. Yeah. There's a big difference as well. So are they applying a different retrospective themselves?
They are.
Or is this all your work, or is this the amalgamation of all the ideas? Or do you let them all speak effectively in the book?
Yeah. So maybe I'll just speak for a minute for the way the book was written with all that, because the feedback that we got from our experience on trail, the number one thing people wanted was to hear from the kids. That's what we heard again. Mm-hmm. But it turns out writing a book, as maybe you're experiencing, it's not an easy thing. Like when you're reading draft 12, you're like, with the rock star part has left the room. Yes. But the way so my wife and I actually started writing together, and she even realized 4 drafts into it, she's like, I don't want to read another draft of this. Like, I don't have anything else to say. So I kind of took over the project with the goal of including as many of the opinions as possible.
Good.
So I quote the kids from the actual trail, from the videos. And then we include the kids' actual like pictures of their journals into the actual book. From the real-time perspective. So it's like not only their quotes, it's their handwriting, pictures of it. And then at the end, we have an epilogue where they each hand wrote, some of them like a page of what their current thoughts are. So the readers will be able to see like exactly, we didn't monkey with that.
So have they looked back? So I don't want to give the ending away, but because we know you got there, but have they looked back with these different eyes, and are they all happy they went?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's weird. And there's even like I said, it's not black or white, but like we all are like, there's these moments where like, we can't believe we did that. But it's something that most of them are wanting to do again in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, interesting.
They're talking and planning about other through hikes. And I'm not going to give all our plans away, but there's discussions of the future.
Sure.
And yeah, they all, for the most part, like, it was worth it to them. I think that's the question that every through hiker faces. Like, not was it easy, was it great, but was it worth it?
Right.
And I think most through hikers would say it was. And I don't think my kids are really any different in that way.
Sure. Now, I noticed that you have a co-writer, or explain that.
Yeah. So when I first started this project, I had always kind of wanted to write, but I felt like this story was so valuable to me that I wanted to make sure it was done well. And I didn't have the confidence with merging 8 voices over 5 months and 161 days to be able to do that. Cause I felt like I was more this, it was almost like a trail journal. I wanted to include every detail and every trail magic and every story. and every crazy day. But hiring a writer, her name was Megan, and she really helped me with organizing the events into themes that kind of, I think, will help the reader progress along a story instead of just feeling like they're getting slammed with name after name after name and crazy. Because when you're hiking, every day is crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, but you can't write about 161 crazy days. I mean, I don't think you can.
Well, look, you know, I've read loads of AT books, and you've kindly said you're sending me a copy, which I'm looking forward to reading, and I will read. I told Ben before we started actually recording that I'll read it, and if I really like it, I'll tell everybody on the podcast. If I don't like it, I'll tell him only.
I think you should tell everyone no matter what, because I actually think it's a worthwhile. I wanted to make this contribution. The book is dedicated to thru hikers.
Sure.
Because thru hikers have just a warm place in my heart, the people that choose to undertake these types of things. And I think it's worth telling the truth about, no matter what anyone thinks. I mean, we're thru hikers, and it's our story. And if people like it or don't like it,
you got my word, then.
Like, I would rather just people tell the truth about it.
Well, look, okay, Ben. Well, look, tell us. Well, firstly, good luck with the book. Tell us the title and tell us where people can get it.
So the book is called 2,000 Miles Together, the story of the largest family to hike the Appalachian Trail. It's available on Amazon, and I mean, I think there's you sign up for these distribution companies, and I think it's available on barnesandnoble.com. And it's, if you like, some signed copies are available on our own website, fightfortogether.com.
I tell you what we do, Ben. We put all the links in the show notes, so you can send me those, and we'll make sure they're in the show notes. And I just wish you well with the book and whatever your next adventure is. And if it's a hiking adventure, come on the show and tell me about that as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve. I can't wait to hear what you think. Honestly, good or bad, say it all.
I definitely will. Okay, buddy. You take it easy, all right?
Thank you.
Bye. Ben was kind enough to send me a copy of his book, signed by the whole family, by the way, and I started reading it to get a gist of what it was going to be like. He doesn't hold anything back. I think you'll be impressed by how open he is, even to the extent of sharing some of the graphic hate that he received on social media. It reads very much like I hoped it would. I was immediately taken into the family dynamic, much as I was on the videos, and it was fascinating for me to see copies of the odd page of the kids' journals that give real clues to their state of mind throughout the hike. I'm really enjoying it so far, and as I said I would, I'll give you my honest opinion when I finished it. And Ben kindly also offered to give away a signed copy of one of his books to you, our listeners. All you need to do is write to me, steve@hikingradionetwork.com, and tell me where Ben and his family were visited by the Child Protection Services. I'll draw out a winner next week, ask for that person's address, and Ben will mail a signed copy to you. Thanks, Ben. The links to all 3 books, including the one I read at the end of this episode, will be in this week's show notes. By the way, on the subject of show notes, I know that not all podcasts, aggregators, not all of them feature the pictures and the links in the show notes. One place that I guarantee you can see and click on everything is our new website, hikingradionetwork.com. Don't forget, not only is my show there, but we also have Anna's Trail Danes podcast, Jester's Section Hiker podcast, as well as 3 completed hike podcasts. Well, 2 of the 3 were completed by Dixie on the Continental Divide Trail, Bruce RTK Matson on the Appalachian Trail, and Ryan Hopkins' curtailed hike earlier this year. While you're at the website, please consider a donation to the shows. It truly helps keep things going, what with equipment breakdown, which happened earlier this week, fees and so on, and I really appreciate every time I get notification of a new donation. This week, 4 of our monthly donors, Mike DiCello, Michelle Brown, Suzanne Johnson and Vicky Thomason, continue with their support, along with a new sponsor to one of our other shows. Josh Smith of Pocket Trails has decided to sponsor Jester's Section Hikers series of hikes on the Mountains to Sea Trail in North Carolina. Josh has an app that's a guide to the MST, and each episode of that series, Jester will be talking about the app in a short ad. Thanks to you, Josh, and thanks to everybody for keeping us on track, both literally and metaphorically. Finally today, and it's funny how interwoven some of the stories are today, Larry Luxembourg tells us the story of another giant map. I'll see you next week. Who are the thru hikers? What are these, so withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it? Macbeth by William Shakespeare. People used to call an AT through hike the adventure of a lifetime. Now it's more like a jumping off point into the world of adventure. In 1989, Noel, the singing horseman to Cavalcanti, completed an AT through hike. In 1990, he paddled the Mississippi River for 3.5 months. That same year, one of Noel's 1989 hiking companions, Carol Lagunatic Moore, happened upon Jim the Geek Adams, who was hiking the AT with his cat, Ziggy. The geek was near the end of what he called the ultimate triathlon vacation. He and Ziggy had paddled the Ohio and the Mississippi the previous fall. After hiking the AT, they would complete their adventure by bicycling from Maine to their starting point in Pennsylvania. Eventually, the geek and the singing horseman got in touch with each other and traded tips for the rest of their adventures. Who are these 2,000 milers, and why do they hike the AT? Moreover, why do they and the thousands of other hikers, maintainers and trail angels who make up the AT community feel such a strong attachment to the trail? Common to the 2,000 milers is a spirit of adventure. They are energetic wanderers, open to their dreams. Each requires a powerful impetus to keep going 6 months, up and down steep mountains, through all kinds of weather. Everyone who backpacks the AT experiences discomfort. Only those who can shrug off the miseries and savour the joys of the trail will last. The through hikers I've met seemed alive, said 3-time 2,000 miler Albie Pokrob. They had a spark in their eye, a wild look, full of life. As of 1993, nearly 3,000 people had reported to ATC that they hiked the entire trail, either in one trip or over many years. Nearly 3/4 have completed their trip since 1980, and 98% have done the trip since 1970. Myron H. Avery, one of the principal architects of the trail, was the first to complete it, in 1936, hiking sections over 9 years. In 1948, Earl V. Schaefer became the first person to hike the entire trail in one trip, a true through hiker. Through hikers are a remarkably diverse group. The youngest to hike the entire trail was Michael Cogswell, who was 6 in 1980 when he hiked with his parents, Jeffrey and Raina. Jeffrey had previously bicycled across the United States and canoed the Pacific. In an article Jeffrey wrote after they completed the AT in 8.5 months, he quoted Michael as saying, "I learned that any time I can't do something, all I have to do is try harder." Ernie Morris completed the trail in 1975 at age 86. He did it in several long stretches over 4 years, always carrying a heavy backpack. Through hikers have come from as far away as England, Australia, Hawaii and Alaska. The trail has been home to twins, brothers and sisters, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters, married couples, groups of college students, speed hikers, free spirits and more serious sorts. In recent years, about 20% of the through hikers have been women. The handicapped have been well represented, including a blind man, 2 others did half the trail, a 3-time hiker with multiple sclerosis, a deaf person and at least one with a hip replacement. Occupations range from nun to retired admiral to Supreme Court justice. Many through hikers hold advanced academic degrees, including PhDs, and many dissertations have been written about the trail and related subjects. Doctors, surgeons and nurses are not uncommon, nor are teachers, Alaskan fish canners, engineers, clergymen or those pursuing alternative lifestyles. A large number are retired military men. Eagle Scouts are common. Some are artists, singers, rangers and outdoor educators. What you generally will not find are genuine mountain men. Many through hikers can't even identify poison ivy. Few of today's hikers have grown up on farms or even in rural areas. Roger Brickner, who has met more 2,000 milers than all but a handful of people, says through hikers hail mostly from the suburbs. Not surprisingly, long-distance hikers tend to be introverts. Dr. O.W. Red Owl Lacey, a psychologist, has studied the personalities of 2,000 milers and trail activists for more than a decade, compiling profiles of more than 800 hikers, including 500 through hikers. He found that introverts are twice as common among 2,000 milers as among the general population. In the population at large, 2/3 to 3/4 are extroverts. Among hikers, 2/3 are introverts. That's an overwhelming discrepancy. It's a clear-cut and well-established profile, said Dr. Lacey, who completed the trail in 1980 after a decade of walking bits and pieces. Particular types of introverts that are rare in general are common among 2,000 milers. At the other end of the spectrum, few through hikers are extreme extroverts. It makes sense because even hikers who complete the whole trail with a partner usually walk alone a large part of the day. Although everyone needs to extrovert a little every day, too much socialising drains introverts and energises extroverts. The introvert gets his or her energy from the inner world of ideas and feelings and images, says Dr. Lacey. Extroverts get their energy from the outer world of activity, of people and things. The large majority of the population prefers to see the world in terms of facts, what's tangible, but among hikers, 2/3 prefer to see the world in terms of possibilities. Perhaps the archetypal personality of a long-distance hiker was that of Henry David Thoreau. He was an independent loner, a lover of nature, a dreamer. Although he didn't take many long hikes, he was comfortable for long periods with his own company. Throughout his life, he had trouble reconciling himself to the dictates of society. Since few extreme extroverts are on the trail, they stand out. One day in April 1980, Rick Hancock, Jeff the Chief Leverdier, and Al Atial Sochard decided to hike under a full moon north from Hot Springs, North Carolina. "We did it," Rick said, "and we wanted everyone to know we did it." What they did was hike 20 miles to a little laurel shelter, arriving well after midnight singing a loud chorus of "When the Saints Come Marching In." They roused a packed shelter and a half-dozen hikers tenting nearby. "Just about everybody was mad at us," Rick said. "Looking back on it, we shouldn't have done it." Despite the extreme physical effort needed to complete the trail, most through hikers do not possess special athletic prowess. In fact, strong athletes are more likely to aggressively challenge the trail and exit with injuries than are the frail and the cautious. Most 2,000 milers say attitude and determination are far more important than strength and conditioning. Women less than 90 pounds have hiked the trail with full backpacks. An early through hiker, Grandma Gatewood, said, "Head is more important than heel." As part of their pilgrimage, most through hikers assume a new identity, a trail name. Trail names on the AT go back at least to the early 70s, but they caught on in the late 70s when the number of hikers increased dramatically. Now trail names are almost mandatory. Examples of actual trail names are included as chapter headings in this book. Some fit so well that after a while it's hard to recall the hikers' given names. Trail names reflect a sort of split personality in which one's trail identity is far removed from one's other life in, say, the corporate world. Trail names are so widespread that one can hike with someone for weeks and not know the name his parents would use. "It's dropping one persona and taking on another," said Leonard, habitual hiker, Adkins. In high school and college, people get nicknames. Trail names show that you are being accepted into the club. You're freer to become someone you always wanted to be. Greg Pooh Nertner, assistant ATC field representative in New England, earned his trail name when he left the AT in 1989 to attend his sister's college graduation in upstate New York. On his way back to the trail, he was waiting for a train at Pennsylvania Station in New York City. He set his pack down too hard and a big glass jar of honey inside the pack shattered. "The honey went over everything," Greg recounted. "So, I'm sitting on the ground in my grungy through-hiker clothes in Pennsylvania Station, taking things out and licking them off and putting them down next to me. I felt like a derelict. Then some guy, faking a foreign accent, came up to me and said, 'Rockefeller Station, how do I get to Rockefeller Station?' I knew from my days living right across the river in New Jersey, so I started explaining to him. Then he said, 'No, write down.' I wrote it down and gave it to him. Then he said, 'Thank you,' and disappeared. I looked down and my camera equipment was gone. My jacket was gone. I'd been scammed. He and somebody else had robbed me, and it was all because of this stupid jar of honey." Like Winnie, Greg the Pooh is now known for his love of honey. Why through hike? More often than not, people turn to the trail at times of radical change in their life. When they're graduating from school, considering a new career, retiring, or dealing with personal trauma such as divorce, loss of job, or the death of a close friend or relative. Some are disillusioned with a job or just burned out. One through hiker did the trail after both his divorces. Others hike the trail for the physical and mental challenge to see if they can attain a goal that demands dedication and focus. Still others want to get closer to nature and to enjoy the trail community, Paul, lucky Hollowball, said just once in his life he wanted to get into the woods and see what life was like for the pioneers. Often, the origin of a desire to hike the trail is murky. It is, after all, hard to remember the origin of a dream. Sometimes it's a chance remark by a friend, a newspaper article, an earlier encounter with the trail that is nurtured in the dim recesses of the mind for decades until it one day pops out unbidden with surprising force. Many began thinking about the AT after spotting a highway sign at a trail crossing. For others, it's more of a spur-of-the-moment decision. Before they know it, they're on the trail in Georgia carrying a heavy backpack north. As a teenager, Laurie Mountain Laurel Podiger saw a slideshow by a thru-hiker. He said that when he reached a town, he'd eat a whole pie. When I heard that, said Laurie, I said, this thing's for me. For Gordon Old Man Gamble, a retired AT engineer, hiking the trail was a dream nurtured for 15 years until retirement made it possible. He used the time wisely, planning his thru-hike meticulously to ease the stress on his frail 66-year-old body and arthritic knees. Barb Briggs, a 1986 thru-hiker from New Hampshire, first met a 2,000-miler in 1985. After talking to him for a while, I figured if he could do it, I could do it, she said. Some thru-hikers had previous backpacking or outdoor experience, but at least as many others had backpacked only a few days before they did the AT. A few thru-hikers had never backpacked as much as a day before they journeyed to Springer Mountain. According to Rowley Moiser, who did a detailed study of AT thru-hikers, some 10 to 20% had little or no backpacking experience before starting the AT. Many are the only hikers in their families. Many thru-hikers feel that inexperienced backpackers have as good a chance as veterans to complete the trail. If, as two-time thru-hiker Phil Pepin says, mental attitude is 90% requirement for the trip, those with a powerful desire have an advantage over those with technical skills but less commitment. Indeed, much of the useful backpacking knowledge can be acquired en route, for the AT is like a university of hiking. On this trail, one finds some of the world's most experienced backpackers, many of whom know every trick in the books, and some that aren't there. Being a novice doesn't preclude a successful thru-hike, but most hikers stress that you should prepare extensively before starting. In the 1970s, it was not unusual to find teenagers hiking the trail alone. Most hikers were either college age or younger, or retirees. Few were in their 30s or 40s. Recently, teenagers on the trail have become rare. Hikers in their middle and senior years are common. Elmer Hall thinks the trend of teenage hikers in the 70s was part of a wave of rebellious youths travelling the world. As for the older hikers, Gene Cashin of ATC attributes it partly to downturns in the economy. People who lose their jobs frequently turn to the trail as a cheap place to review their options and gather their resolve. Another trend is that more women are hiking the trail. Many hike with a husband or boyfriend, but some have no partner. Of the 3,000 people who had completed the trail by 1993, more than 300 were women. Profile: Bill Stats Godric Gunderson. At the ATC's biennial meeting in Dahlonega, Georgia, Bill Sprained Rice O'Brien told me Stats had just set up his 75-foot-long map of the AT and I should go and see it. He said to be sure to climb the ladder to get the best viewpoint. Painstakingly done, Bill Gunderson's map gives the best perspective I've seen on Appalachian Trail terrain. I started without realising what I was getting into, Bill said. Perhaps Bill Gunderson's fascination with elevation profiles has a simple explanation. After all, he spent his entire life in the flat areas of Chicago and Minnesota. By chance, Bill came across the AT during a New England bus trip in 1985. He saw a line on a map that represented the AT. Curious, he got out in Vermont, hiked over Killington and thought it was great. During the next few years, he continued to hike. Finally, in 1989, he thru-hiked the AT. A year later, in November 1990, he started doodling on a detailed map of Virginia. I didn't have a great plan, he says. It was doodling that kept building on itself. He picked 1,000-metre contours, about 3,500 feet, to colour in. He was curious about the highland areas. There were many near Mount Rogers, but few around Roanoke, and none near the AT. Large areas of West Virginia were at that elevation, but his gazetteer ended and he was curious to see how far those areas went. He ordered the U.S. Geological Survey maps from North Carolina, Georgia and West Virginia to see the areas above 1,000 metres. But that elevation didn't show much in the northeast, so he lowered his hurdle to 700 metres, where red spruce starts. He started colouring the forest green. He chose red to show the low, flat ridges of Pennsylvania. Looking at the area these elevations would cover, he decided it would be too much work to do the south. But, being incomplete, it looked stupid, he said. I gritted my teeth and started colouring in the western slopes. He ordered more maps and his living room filled up. He'd order 10 US Geological Survey maps at a time. He'd finish those and order more. A year later, after devoting most of his spare time to the map, he was finished. It had grown to 75 feet, consisting of 135 topographic maps from Alabama to Canada. On each he had painstakingly coloured in areas bounded by the contour lines. He used 6 colours, each representing 300 metres, nearly 1,000 feet, of elevation change. The overall effect is striking. Seeing it as a whole really showed me the complexity of the mountains, Bill said. Nowhere else can one get such a detailed and compelling perspective on the Appalachian Mountains. One sees the steep drop-offs, the great gorges carved by rivers, and the serpentine ridge pattern from the Alabama foothills to the higher peaks of Tennessee, North Carolina, and New England. It's like looking at the Earth from a spaceship orbiting at 100 miles up. Bill deliberately refused to put in state lines or political boundaries. He said, I'm just interested in the mountains and where the ridge lines are. For Bill, one of the map's clear lessons is that there are a lot of other mountains to know, love and protect, besides the ones the AT touches. Although it's 2,000 miles long, the trail corridor is only 1,000 feet wide. Bill had hiked a little before his through hike. His main shakedown trip was a 10-day backpacking trek on the AT in 1988. He decided after that to do the whole trail. The contrast between those 2 years was really wild, he said. A drought in 1988 put Watauga Lake, Tennessee, 40 feet lower than usual. One could walk across part of the lake bed, saving a half mile of hiking. In 1989, it was so wet one couldn't even walk on the trail. All through the south in 1989, Bill faced severe weather. He was in the worst hailstorm of his life near Woody Gap, Georgia. For the first week and a half, he was hit with 7 inches of snow, and it was always below freezing. After Hot Springs, North Carolina, it was cold and wet. One day in early May, when he was hiking into Damascus, Virginia, it never rose above 38 degrees. The bad weather strengthened the camaraderie of the hikers. At Brown Mountain Shelter near Lynchburg, Virginia, his spirits reached low ebb after 4 straight days of rain. My feet were tired of being wet, he said, but he'd quit his job and wasn't prepared to drop off the trail. To save embarrassment, I wasn't going to renege for any minor reason, he said. He reached Maccabee Knob in Virginia just as the sun was setting and found the view to be one of the best on the trail. Bill's worst day began when he hiked from Upper Goose Pond, Massachusetts. He left his guidebook there and had to walk back a mile to retrieve it. On a rough, relocated stretch of trail, he cut his hand. An overhanging branch almost poked his eye out. He thought, what else can go wrong? In the main wilderness, he broke his pack and spent 2 days getting it fixed. Meanwhile, his trail friends had gone ahead and he wanted to find them to finish the trail together. He hiked 26 miles past Abel Bridge into Baxter State Park. He came to a rocky stream, but it was so dark he couldn't see a thing. He camped right on the trail. Early the next morning, Bill made it to Dacey Pond, where most through hikers stay the day before climbing Katahdin. He didn't see his friends, but he started up. I ran up the mountain. I was so happy to be there. On top, he saw no one except a father and son, both celebrating their birthdays that day with cherry pie. Bill joined their celebration and later located his friends back at Dacey Pond and climbed again with them the next day. Of finishing the trail, Bill said, I was sad. It was a letdown. The trail became part of my life. I wanted it to keep going. After being home for a week, he went to an alder gathering. From there, he finished 40 miles of trail that he'd skipped. The continuing trail ties helped him gradually acclimatise to the outside world. One thing Bill especially misses from the trail is the way the wind was always in my face when I slept. He adds, I'm still sleeping on the floor. I rarely sleep in a bed. It keeps me in trail shape. After the trail, he kept looking for blazes. Traffic seemed strange, how quickly it moved and how much there was. He has tried to stay self-propelled, relying on bicycling and walking for transportation. After his hike, Bill became involved with prairie restoration. I've learned to value grasses a lot more. I'm not so fond of trees. On top of a mountain in the east, you feel big. You never really feel the size of the earth as you do on the plains. I've changed my values. I appreciate the Appalachians, but I've learned to appreciate the Midwest, the unlimited horizons.